Hey guys, Jim Vinosky with Manufacturing Talks. We're talking about energy again today, and I've got a couple of great guys to talk about it with us. That's Isaac Orr and Mitch Rolling. They are with a new outfit. It's called Always On Energy Research. They just founded it. They got a great background. They've done some absolutely phenomenal work, and they're here to share what they know about the all important topic of energy. You've heard it here before. You're going to hear it again in just a few minutes from Isaac and Mitch. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host, and I'm really glad to be joined by a couple of superstars today, Isaac Orr, Mitch Rolling. They are from the Always On Energy Research outfit that they just put together. These guys are superstars, like I said, and I'm looking forward to big things out of their new place. Isaac is the VP of Research, and Mitch is Director of Research. Welcome, fellas.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you guys on. I've been reading your stuff for so long, and finally, the light bulb went off. Like, geez, I gotta have these guys on my show. It's great stuff.
Well, we're happy to be here, Jim.
Excellent.
Yep.
And we've got so much to talk about. I've covered energy on a number of shows, and it continues to be obviously a hot topic. So we'll dive in a minute. But before we do that, I just want to hear from you guys. What your background is, how you got doing what you're doing today. So we'll start with you, Isaac.
All right. Yeah. I grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin, so I've always kind of cared about. It was a small operation. We milked 40 head. Had we farrowed hogs because my grandpa was a pig dealer, just bought and sold feeder pigs. So he liked that. And then we had beef cattle too. So from a really young age, I realized that a lot of people didn't really understand what the ag industry was about. There seemed to be this kind of bifurcation in the thought process that you either needed to be like an organic farm that never gave your animals antibiotics, or you were a large confined animal feeding operation and all you did was feed them antibiotics. And we were kind of in the middle. So, if something's sick, treat them. But, let's not get crazy with it. So just seeing how many, I'd say liberal organizations mischaracterized the agriculture industry gave me a healthy skepticism of that. So it was always Madison and Milwaukee, right, for us.
Yep.
And I went to school for geology and political science at Eau Claire. And the house I grew up in was the same house my grandpa was born in. So during the summer, it would get when it got hot, the cows would drink a lot of water, and it would actually draw the well pressure down in the well. So we didn't have any water in the house. So I'd get done doing chores or baling hay, and I wouldn't have the ability to take a shower. So when I was in my environmental geology class in college, and we were talking about well pressure and all that kind of stuff, I was like, oh, this is very relevant. So I used that kind of background. I had gotten a job at the Heartland Institute. I wrote about hydraulic fracturing for them for several years. And then I got into the electricity space, and that's where I'm at today.
Excellent. How about you, Mitch?
So I didn't grow up on a farm, but so I kind of got into this in a different route. My degree in college was history, and I joined the Center of the American Experiment as an intern. And there was a moment there where I was kind of getting bored of doing just kind of clerical stuff. And so I went to Isaac and said, hey, you got anything for me? And he kind of led me along the lines of, getting involved in energy and environmental research. And that's always been my thing, is being really interested in just research and, digging up the buried bodies that people don't want you to know about. And that's kind of my route into this. And that's kind of my role at Always On too, is, research, modeling, and uncovering the dead bodies. So.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, and I should have mentioned that you guys write under the name Energy Bad Boys, which I love. Because in today's environment, anyone uncovering those inconvenient facts is kind of a bad boy, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we are pariahs and we embrace it. So you can find us on Substack at Energy Bad Boys for the folks listening at home.
And you guys do put out so much information. And what I love about it is it's got all the facts, all the reasoning very clearly laid out. So it's just such powerful material for someone like me who's, speaking and writing about things in a more general manner. So if you think about everything you guys have learned on the energy front, what are the top 2 or 3 that people really need to know nowadays?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at that question. We are kind of hurtling towards a reliability crisis, and a lot of people do not acknowledge that because their power hasn't gone off yet. So there's a pervasive milk comes from the store and electricity comes from the outlet mentality among a lot of people who don't have, and I don't know, it kind of makes sense that there's rational ignorance on this front, Jim, because they've never had to worry about it before. But that does mean that they're, kind of susceptible to believing things that like, oh yeah, wind and solar are going to be cheaper and they're going to be reliable. So those are kind of the big myths that are like, so the first one is not a myth. That is the reliability problems that we're kind of steering headlong into. But then there's the myth of, well, we can have this Green New Deal society and it's going to be better for everyone.
Right. Yeah, that was mine as well. We're in a struggle for reliability and affordability on the grid, and caution is kind of being thrown to the wind by people who think that the planet is going to be unlivable in the foreseeable future, and that's just not the case. Energy policy is being led by doomsdayers. And they don't seem to have any care for reliability and affordability. And people, as Isaac kind of brought up, they don't really know what they don't know. They think that, anything that produces electricity is a suitable replacement for the thermal, resources that we have on the grid. And that's just not the case.
Right. Yeah. And you guys just touched on so many points we definitely need to visit. The first one that I want to talk about, though, is that whole really myth, as you said, Isaac, that wind and solar are cheap and much less reliable. But you hear that all the time now. Oh, wind and solar, they're the lowest cost energy generation out there. So why is that incorrect?
Yeah, well, I mean, they look cheap on paper if you use creative accounting metrics. So, the main way that the cost of energy is conveyed to the public is something called the levelized cost of energy. And there's a report by Lazard out there that is most frequently cited by advocates of wind and solar to support this claim. And it's interesting because Lazard's first page of their report says, we don't take into account the cost of transmission, which is super necessary for all electricity generating sources, but especially wind and solar, because oftentimes they're being built very far away from the people and factories that are actually consuming this power. So you need a very long, expensive extension cord in order to connect those to the grid. It doesn't take into account things like property taxes. It does take additional utility profits into account, but it also doesn't take into account the reliability needs of the grid. So basically, the levelized cost of energy tries to tell you the cost of an energy generator per megawatt hour of electricity consumed. So it's basically trying to show you the cost of driving your car on a per mile basis. But if your car doesn't work all the time, you're going to need a backup. And the LCOE does not incorporate the cost of that backup generation. So what Mitch and I have done is we've put together a model that allows us to suss that out based on how much wind and solar you're trying to rely on the grid. And when you're trying to rely on an unreliable source, it gets very expensive because you need a lot of battery storage. So when you incorporate in all of these hidden factors, it's actually the most expensive way to run a power system.
Right. And the way I like to say that too, in another way, agreeing with everything Isaac just said, is that, the LCOE is the standalone cost to run a single plant. It does not convey the cost of running a grid that involves the cooperation of many other numerous plants together. And, it's just an inefficient way to run a system. It doesn't account for all the things that Isaac just said, backup costs, the cost of overbuilding and curtailing, and that cost of inefficiency is far more expensive than the cost of fuel for thermal plants, and that is just not taken into account.
Yeah, and in some regard, the beauty of what wind and solar have been allowed to do is they've capitalized on those existing installations, the previous truly reliable sources, the gas and coal and nuclear and hydro. And none of those numbers, when they rely on those things because the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, is included in that LCOE, right?
Right. Exactly. Yep. No, exactly right. And it's not just the cost front. They actually rely on the thermal plants for the reliability metrics too. And as the thermal plants go off the system, their reliability for wind and solar actually sinks as well. So the costs go higher and the reliability goes down as thermal plants are taken off the grid.
Yeah, so let's dig into that further because we're now hearing from the grid operators, where we are, it's MISO and very stark warnings from MISO late last year about, we are, like you said in the start, Isaac, headed for a potential disaster around reliability. So tell me a little more about, given that we had these systems already there, we added wind and solar, how come reliability is a problem?
Well, we're going to shut down too many coal plants is the main takeaway there. So MISO is one of the regional transmission organizations that is the most heavily dependent on coal. And a lot of states have said, oh yeah, we're going to go 100% carbon free by 2040, 2035, like you name whatever unrealistic target date. That's what they say they're going to do. And then the utilities in those states say that they're going to shut their coal plants down before that time. And we're already seeing this. And the only reason the reliability problems aren't worse currently today is because some companies have decided to delay the closure of their coal plants. But it's only because they can't replace it with natural gas many times because people don't want to allow the new gas plants to go into existence and they don't want the pipelines that go along with it. So that's a big thing. Mitch, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, it's some of these coal, thermal plants are being put on life support. If you look at ERCOT, they're trying everything to keep these plants on the system, but unfortunately, they're up against a mammoth of unreliability policies that are, the worst one are the subsidies for wind and solar. And that is very hard to counteract. You can do things at the state level and the regional level to counteract those subsidies, but they're incredibly hard to get past, and I think even where there's motive to do it, like in Texas, we're seeing that it's very hard to keep those plants open with the distortions caused by wind and solar subsidies. And so it's a fight, as we said in the beginning, it's a struggle for the reliability, and we're currently losing, so that's unfortunate.
Yeah. And, here in Michigan, I think we have shut down or are on trend to shut down something like 6 gigawatts of coal generation. We've got the Palisades nuclear plant that already went down, and now, we're spending, $1.5 billion to restart it, but that's only going to bring back, on its existing capacity, less than 1 gigawatt. If we add the small modular reactors that Holtec wants to, it'll take it up to something like 1.2 gigawatts. So, a fifth of what we're losing.
Yep.
And we have the advantage of having this recently shuttered nuclear plant down the road. Most people don't have that. And you talked about states, Isaac, but now it's also the feds in the game with the recent EPA rulings. Essentially now, unless we come up with a magical technology that doesn't exist at scale around carbon capture, we're not only going to be shutting down coal, but also gas plants as well, right?
Yeah, so EPA finalized their rules on carbon dioxide emissions, and the final rules strip out existing natural gas plants for now. It's a temporary, I call it a CYA measure.
Right.
It's a very technical term, Jim.
Yeah.
They are regulating emissions from existing coal-fired power plants, essentially setting up a retrofit or retire situation. The coal plant can not install CCS, which is not a adequately demonstrated best system of emissions reductions. I don't care what EPA says. They've got like 2 plants that have tried it, and neither of them have been very successful at it. So essentially, they're going to force coal plants to shut down with these regulations, and they're imposing new regulations on new natural gas plants, essentially saying they also have to have CCS on their plants in the early 2030s. So right at a time when demand for electricity is skyrocketing, thanks to data centers and new manufacturing facilities, we are kicking the legs out from underneath the grid. And there's really no good way for that to work out. And one of the things that EPA uses as a justification for this is like, oh, well, we're going to build a lot more wind and solar. We're going to build a lot more transmission. And then we'll just be able to kind of wheel power across the country whenever someone needs it. And that's impractical for a lot of reasons. It's super difficult to build transmission. And also, the wind isn't always blowing somewhere. So you might try to build all of this stuff and the wind still doesn't blow. We talk about this in a piece called Wind Drought Blackout on our Substack. And the states are doing the same thing. So states are employing California energy policy. And the problem with that is you eventually run out of someone else's electricity. Yeah. And what I mean by that is whenever a state, like let's say Michigan, they want to close the Campbell coal plant. I think that's what it's called. So they say, okay, well, we're going to shut down 6,000 megawatts of coal capacity in Michigan. But when we need the power, we'll just go to the MISO market and purchase that. So the problem is everybody thinks they're going to go to the MISO market, not realizing they're playing a game of blackout musical chairs.
Yeah.
Right. Because while they're doing that, MISO is going to go to PJM, and it's just down the line. So,
yep. Mm-hmm. Well, I find it interesting too. You mentioned the resurging manufacturing in America, and part of that is actually coming from Germany, where they've already headed down this road, and they pay some of the highest electricity rates in the world. And now I wrote about them seeing the front end of deindustrialization. Just had another announcement on a steel company pulling out of Germany because of the cost of electricity. And here we are following their exact lead on regulations.
Yeah, I
don't think our resurgence of manufacturing is going to last too long.
No. And there was a steel plant in Hibbing, Minnesota that shut down because of high electricity prices, thanks to Minnesota's renewable energy mandates. Yeah. So I forget, I'm forgetting the name of the company, but they put out a press release and said, we are leaving because of high electricity prices in Minnesota relative to where we have our other operations. So that was in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. And the reason they said they were able to keep their Michigan plants open is because Michigan has like a special rate for companies like that. So, rather than just having a rational energy policy where electricity prices are low for everyone, you start to see cost shifting. And you in Minnesota, it's the iron mines and the paper mills that get a special electricity rate that allows them to buy it at a lower cost. And that saves one industry maybe, but you're also putting a lot more burden on everyone else. So other companies, residential ratepayers. So the politicians do their best to CYA and make it look like, everything is fine. But in the end, you can't deny reality forever. And boy, howdy, am I happy to see Germany getting what they deserve, because they've been so smug for so long. And, Schadenfreude.
Ouch, using their own language against them.
That's right.
But you're absolutely right. They were for the better part of a decade singing the praises of Energiewende, and now it's not anything they're bragging about at this point. And of course, shutting down their nuclear plants was just the icing on the cake. Their last 3 shut down, and prices took another spike. It's just, you can't even write satire to match what reality is giving us these days. So Mitch, let me throw it back to you on this question. We've talked about all the stuff that's wrong. How do we chart a new course? What needs to be done?
Well, the specifics are unclear, but we need to find a way to keep reliable power plants on the grid. But not only that, we need to find a way to build them in the future. And, if emissions reductions is a, primary concern, then we really need to find a way to, streamline nuclear builds in the future. And we need to get started now because they take quite a while to build. But in the meantime, Isaac and I are still fans of coal. We're still fans of natural gas. They need to be part of the solution. Those are really, coal especially is, taken for granted for how good of a resource it is. It provides storage, it provides cheap electricity, and we're just throwing that, in the trash can. And we shouldn't be, and, smart countries around the world, understand that. And even China, who's building them, right now and, for the foreseeable future, they don't plan to stop. And so, we need a way to keep, and, not just keep them on the grid right now. Like I said, we're keeping them on life support right now. And even in California, but we need to find a way to make them, keep them profitable, bring the revenue in, not just keep them on life support, but give them a, 10, 20, 30 year, extension to their life, and not just think that they're, going to be closed down, in 5 years, because then they skimp on maintenance. What's the point? And we're seeing that in a lot of places too. So yeah, we need to find a way to keep, those plants online, give them the revenue that they need, pay them accordingly, and then build new ones in the future.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that about storage, because that's a point that Meredith Angwin talks about all the time. She was on the show too many months ago. Needed to have her back on too. That whole idea that not having fuel on site is itself a reliability problem. Clearly, wind and solar, they're right out the door. But even gas, for example, gas plants shut down during the Texas winter storm a couple of years ago because the gas lines couldn't operate properly. Valves froze and things like that. So coal, magical, because you can have big piles of coal sitting outside your coal plant, right?
Yep.
And the storage is free because you need to have the coal there anyway. It's the same with nuclear power. And, you can build liquefied natural gas tanks. You can do that. It's going to cost you $80 million for like a 285 megawatt facility. So it's expensive. And you're not going to have the kind of long-term storage that you have with coal and nuclear. But hey, it's a lot cheaper than batteries. If you had the exact same amount of battery storage, it would cost you over $11 billion. So, the green dreams of wind, solar, and battery storage just don't pencil out, but they keep saying, oh, well, the batteries will be cheaper in the future. Like, cut it in half. Okay, cool. It's only $5.5 billion compared to $80. Like, kind of doesn't matter when you're talking about long duration storage.
Well, and it was your recent battery article that prompted me finally to ask you guys on here. And that was just marvelous, because the timing was so impeccable, because now on LinkedIn, you see people constantly crowing, oh, look, California ran on batteries for 5 minutes and Texas ran for a minute on batteries. That's the future. And they never mention a single thing about what those teeny tiny rounding error capacities of battery storage cost. And so you guys come along. It's like, here's what it costs. It's insane.
Congratulations, California. You're paying 41 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yep. For battery storage, which is not generating capacity. You actually have to build the capacity to charge the batteries so that you can then discharge them to save your bacon when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
Yep. And that's another issue, besides just the cost. They do, batteries do an okay job, keeping the lights on when they're charged. But when you're relying on an entire system for it, we see this in our modeling all the time. Batteries doing good, and then when they're not charged, you're SOL.
Where else
don't
to
have
go,
anything there, right? Everything else is going full blast, and you get capacity shortfalls.
Yep. You guys have mentioned a couple of times the whole point, the doomsday scenario, the planet's going to burn. What do you say to people who come along and say, well, it doesn't matter what it costs, because if we don't do it, the planet's going to be a cinder block?
I like to point to Winter Storm Uri, because honestly, the grid that they think is going to save civilization is going to destroy it long before it saves it. So, it's kind of like that scene in Team America World Police where they blow up all of France and the Louvre and they're like, we did it, we
Right.
won.
Right.
So like the mantra is basically we need to destroy our standard of living in order to preserve our standard of living. And I just don't buy that. I think that's a really dumb idea. So Mitch, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I just don't, the argument, I don't think it's credible, right? I think there's an argument, is climate change going to cost money? Do we have to adapt to it, right? I think that you can make the case for that, but to make the planet unlivable, I'm not sure that that's even a credible argument. And, I think the argument, like the decision has always been, what's the cost benefit of, trying to confront this crisis? And, what's the smartest way to go about it? The way they're doing it right now, we might as well just do nothing because it's far more expensive than the cost of what climate change will actually do. We can adapt to it. It will be expensive, and you can make that case, but there's a far smarter way to go about this. And their policy direction is not that way. If you want to cut emissions cost effectively and reliably, you'll want two major resources: nuclear and natural gas. The way they're doing it with wind, solar, and battery storage leads to a Germany grid, where everything's too expensive, a California grid, and an ERCOT grid where you can't keep the lights on. So it's there's a smart way to do this, and we're not doing that.
Well, and you mentioned cost versus benefit. You don't see any of that when we start these $1 trillion projects.
Right.
We really ought to be taking a look back at the trillions we've already spent and what the effect on CO2 levels has been, which is pretty much nothing.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's also this kind of pervasive belief that if we do our part, the bad weather won't come for us. Right. And it's almost like climate Passover. Like we'll smear the blood of our people on the door and then the bad things won't come for us. But that's not how it works. The CO2 mixes evenly in the atmosphere. So we also need to think about this in terms of okay, China's ramping up their coal production, Indonesia, India doing the same thing. So what is the net impact that we're going to have on this? So people talk about metrics like the social cost of carbon and, how much is the cost of these CO2 emissions, but that's a global number that they're talking about, not the amount of money that Americans or Michiganders or Minnesotans are going to reap from that. So it's essentially like shoveling an airplane full of money, leaving the doors open and having the plane fly around the world. Like some of those dollars will fall back into the United States, right? But most of it won't. So we also need to keep that in mind when we're looking at the cost benefit analysis, because the people who support more wind and solar like to use a higher number, even though the ROI on that investment is actually very low for the people who are actually spending the money.
Right. And, while the social cost of carbon might be, spread globally, the social cost of blackouts are local. So
hyper local.
So the solution is going to affect locally. The problems are spread around the globe.
Yep. The social cost of destroying our manufacturing base and making ourselves uncompetitive on the world market. What is that?
Yep.
All right. We are almost out of time. Any last thoughts on the main topic before I wrap up?
No, I don't think so. Mitch, have you got anything that you want to plug?
No, I think we covered most of my talking points. So,
well, and it's funny because my last question is what's on the horizon for you too, and you answered it before we got on. It is always on energy research, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So Mitch and I have been doing this modeling gig for several years at Center of the American Experiment. Learned a lot, had a lot of fun doing it. And now we're kind of branching off into our own so we can scale the operations, scale the amount of work that we're able to do, hire more people, and fight more battles. So that's ultimately what we're excited to do, and we use our Substack to do that as well. But always on energy research. Check it out when our website is live at aoenergy.org. You might have to check back a few times because we're still working on it.
Yep. Yeah. In the meantime, like we said, our Substack, Energy Bad Boys.
Yeah, I'll include links to both your future website. People can find that when it's live, Meanwhile, definitely check out their Substack. I'll include a link to that in the show description. Isaac and Mitch, thank you guys so much. Been a very informative discussion, as I knew it would be.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jim.
Yep.
And everyone out there, definitely follow their work. This is vital information, and we're truly headed for some serious breakdowns here unless we change course. So thanks for all you guys are doing to help highlight that and hopefully get us to course correct before it's too late.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And as always, thanks to you guys in the audience. That's why we're here. Hopefully you found this one as informative as I did. I can't promise every show is going to be as informative as Mitch and Isaac made this one, but they're all going to be informative. We're here every Tuesday. If you have anything to add to the conversation, please dump it down in the comments and we'll respond to it. In the meantime, tune in every Tuesday. We'll be here. More interesting shows for you. Thanks again. So long.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Benoski. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.